For 20 years, Amanda Brooks had been just another grease-stained mechanic in a small Montana town, fixing pickup trucks and changing oil with calloused hands that never shook, until the day a team of Navy SEALs walked into her garage and discovered that some secrets are too powerful to stay buried forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The pneumatic wrench clattered against the concrete floor of Castellano's auto service, with a metallic crash that seemed to echo forever. Amanda Brooks, 42, and permanently stained with motor oil under her fingernails, stood motionless beneath the raised Humvee, her weathered hands trembling slightly as she gripped the frame above. Her head, the familiar weight of the vehicle she'd been working under, suddenly felt crushing, but not because of its physical mass. Across the garage bay, Lieutenant Commander Tyler Reed towered over her with the kind of presence that made civilian spaces feel too small. His desert combat boots were polished to a mirror shine despite the dusty Montana roads outside, and his tactical vest bore the unmistakable insignia of Naval Special Warfare Command. Behind him, 2 more SEALs flanked the entrance like sentries, Petty Officer Mason Clarke and Chief Sam Torres, their eyes scanning the garage with the methodical precision of operators assessing a potential threat zone. I specifically requested your most experienced diesel mechanic. Tyler's voice cut through the humid air of the garage like a blade, each word measured and deliberate. Not someone playing mechanic with YouTube tutorials. The sudden silence that followed was deafening. Even the perpetual hum of the air compressor seemed to pause, as if the machines themselves were holding their breath. Amanda's co-workers, Trevor, Hayes, Jesse Park, and Nina Santos, suddenly found their tools and workbenches fascinating. Their eyes fixed anywhere but on the confrontation unfolding in Bay 3. Lou Castellano emerged from his cluttered office, sweat beading on his forehead, despite the industrial fans that churned overhead. At 68, Lou had seen enough confrontations in his 40 years of running the garage to recognize when a situation was about to go sideways. His weathered face carried the expression of a man calculating whether he was about to lose his most lucrative military contract. "Commander Reed," Lou's voice carried a diplomatic tone that didn't quite mask his nervousness. "I apologize for any confusion. Let me get Trevor to handle your vehicle personally. He's been with us for 15 years, and your advertisement claimed expert mechanics capable of handling specialized military equipment." Tyler interrupted, his steel-gray eyes never leaving Amanda's face. Behind him, Mason Clarke shifted his weight slightly, the movement causing his tactical gear to creak softly. "What I see is amateurs and charity cases." The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. Amanda felt each syllable burn, not because of her gender. She'd faced that kind of discrimination for 2 decades, but because they assumed she was hired out of pity rather than skill. She'd heard variations of this dismissal countless times since arriving in Millbrook 20 years ago. But today, something felt different. Today, the uniform across from her carried weight that civilian insults never could. Amanda's hands, scarred from countless repairs and countless memories she tried to forget, slowly released their grip on the Humvee's frame. These weren't just any hands. The thin white line across her left palm told the story of shrapnel from an IED outside Kandahar. The slight tremor in her right index finger was a souvenir from a convoy ambush in Fallujah. Her fingernails, permanently stained black with oil and grease, bore testament to 20 years of deliberately hiding skills that once made her one of the Air Force's most valuable assets. In the shadowy space beneath the vehicle, Amanda closed her eyes for just a moment. The familiar smell of diesel fuel and hydraulic fluid triggered memories. She'd spent 2 decades trying to suppress memories of armored vehicles in desert compounds, of midnight repair missions under enemy fire, of being the only person who could diagnose critical failures when lives hung in the balance. "The differential housing has stress fractures," Amanda said quietly, her voice barely audible above the garage's ambient noise. She hadn't meant to speak at all, but the sight of the damage she'd discovered had overridden 20 years of practice. Invisibility. The garage fell completely silent. Trevor paused mid-reach for his socket set. Nina's hand froze on her clipboard. Jesse stopped pretending to organize his toolbox. Even Lou's nervous shuffling came to a halt. Amanda had never volunteered. Technical information to military personnel. For 20 years, she'd been content to remain invisible, to let others take credit for complex diagnoses, to accept the safety of being underestimated. But something about seeing precision military equipment suffering from neglect triggered instinct she'd buried deep. Chief Torres stepped forward, his expression skeptical. Stress fractures? That vehicle passed its last inspection 2 weeks ago. The microfractures are hairline, Amanda continued, sliding out from under the Humvee, with fluid movements that spoke of decades working in cramped spaces. They're not visible unless you know exactly where to look and what stress patterns to identify. But they'll propagate under load, especially in desert environments with temperature extremes. Tyler's eyebrows drew together slightly. That level of diagnostic precision wasn't something you learned from changing oil on pickup trucks. The terminology alone suggested familiarity with military specifications that shouldn't exist in a small-town garage. She Googled that, Mason Clarke said with a dismissive laugh that echoed off the metal walls. Anyone can memorize technical jargon these days. Then let anyone fix it, Amanda replied, meeting Tyler's penetrating stare directly for the first time. But when your team is stranded in hostile territory because the differential failed, remember you had the chance to prevent it. The challenge in her voice surprised everyone, including herself. For 20 years, Amanda Brooks had been the invisible woman, the mechanic who fixed things quietly and went home to an empty apartment with nothing but a six-pack and old war movies for company. She'd learned that survival in small-town Montana meant blending in, keeping her head down, and never, ever revealing the extent of her capabilities. Lou stepped forward quickly, fear radiating from every pore. Military contracts kept his garage afloat, and he couldn't afford to offend elite Navy SEALs over the pride of one employee, no matter how skilled she might be. Amanda, return to your station. Lou's voice was firm, but not angry. He understood. Desperation. It was the same desperation that had driven him to hire a drifter 20 years ago when she'd shown up with nothing but a worn duffel bag and hands that could make any engine purr. Commander Reed, I'll have Trevor conduct a full inspection, and the hairline fractures are already compromising structural integrity. Amanda interrupted, her voice growing stronger with each word. You've got maybe 6 hours of operation. Before catastrophic failure, your choice. As if summoned by her words, the Humvee's differential emitted a subtle whining sound barely audible, but unmistakable to anyone who understood the language of failing machinery. Trevor whistled low, under his breath. He'd heard that sound before, always followed by expensive towing bills and even more expensive repairs. Tyler studied Amanda's face with the intensity of someone trained to read people's intentions in life or death situations. 20 years of special operations had taught him to recognize expertise, and nothing about this woman's bearing suggested amateur guesswork. Her posture, her terminology, her absolute confidence in her diagnosis, it all pointed to knowledge that couldn't be faked. And you can fix it? Tyler asked, his tone neutral but his attention completely focused. I can fix it, Amanda replied. Simply. The question is whether you trust someone who's been dismissed as a charity case, or whether you want to risk your mission on wounded pride. The standoff stretched for 30 seconds that felt like an hour. Amanda could feel the weight of every stare, every held breath, every assumption about what she was capable of achieving. Behind Tyler, Mason and Torres exchanged glances that spoke of men reconsidering their initial assessment, Finally, Tyler nodded slowly. "Show me." As Amanda reached for her tools, professional-grade instruments that cost more than most vehicles. In the parking lot, she felt the familiar mixture of relief and terror that came with stepping back into the light. For 20 years, she'd hidden her expertise to avoid the questions that came with competence. But today, under the scrutinizing gaze of 3 Navy SEALs, Amanda Brooks was about to remember exactly who she used to be. The differential housing told its story in stress, patterns that spoke fluent metallurgy to eyes trained to read failure. Before it became catastrophic, Amanda's hands moved with the precision of someone who diagnosed similar problems under circumstances where mistakes meant casualties, not just inconvenience. She was about to discover that some skills, once learned, never truly fade. They just wait patiently for the right moment to resurface. Amanda's personal toolkit emerged from her locker like artifacts from a buried civilization. Each instrument bore the weight of history: precision torque wrenches calibrated to military specifications, diagnostic equipment that most civilian garages couldn't afford, and specialized tools that spoke of experience far beyond small-town automotive repair. Trevor, Jesse, and Nina watched in stunned silence as Amanda laid out equipment they'd never seen before, despite working alongside her for years. "Where did you get all that?" Jesse whispered to Nina, his voice carrying a mixture of awe and confusion. Nina shook her head, equally bewildered. In 5 years of working next to Amanda, she'd never seen anything more sophisticated than standard. Socket sets and basic diagnostic scanners emerged from that battered locker. The woman they thought they knew was revealing layers of complexity that challenged everything they'd assumed about their quiet colleague. Amanda seemed oblivious to their stares as she connected a military-grade diagnostic interface to the Humvee's computer system. Her movements were economical and precise, betraying a familiarity with the equipment that spoke of thousands of hours of practice. This wasn't someone who'd learned from manuals. This was someone who'd lived and breathed this technology. Commander Tyler Reed watched every motion with the focused intensity of a predator evaluating potential prey. 20 years of special operations had taught him to recognize expertise, and everything about Amanda's bearing contradicted her supposed background as a small-town mechanic. The way she held her tools, the confidence in her movements, the casual familiarity with military equipment, it all suggested experience that didn't match her current circumstances. "Run a full diagnostic," Tyler ordered, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. Amanda's fingers danced across the diagnostic interface with muscle memory that surprised even her. She'd tried to forget these skills, to bury them under 2 decades of oil changes and tire rotations, but they surfaced now like water finding its level. The diagnostic screen flickered to life, displaying system parameters and performance metrics that most civilian mechanics would find incomprehensible. "Your transmission fluid is contaminated with metal particles," Amanda said without looking up from the display. "Someone's been using the wrong specification lubricant, civilian grade, instead of military standard. It's causing accelerated wear on the synchronizers and creating harmonic vibrations that propagate through the drivetrain." Chief Torres stepped closer, his skepticism now mixed with growing interest. "How can you tell all that from a computer readout?" "Because the frequency analysis shows resonance patterns consistent with metal-on-metal contact under specific load conditions," Amanda replied, her fingers pulling up additional screens with practiced efficiency. "The particle count in the differential housing correlates with transmission wear patterns, and the temperature differential between front and rear axles indicates uneven load distribution caused by synchronizer degradation." The technical explanation flowed from her lips like a foreign language she'd once spoken fluently but had tried to forget. Tyler and his team exchanged glances that spoke of professionals recognizing another professional, regardless of current circumstances. Castellano stood frozen near his office door, watching his supposedly simple mechanic demonstrate knowledge that rivaled certified military technicians. In 20 years, Amanda had never shown this level of expertise, never volunteered complex technical analysis, never revealed the depth of her understanding. She'd been content to change oil, rotate tires, and handle basic repairs while letting Trevor and Jesse tackle anything more sophisticated. The contamination pattern suggests you've been operating in dusty environments without proper filtration. Amanda continued, her voice growing more confident as muscle memory overrode 20 years of deliberate mediocrity. Probably desert conditions, with fine particulate matter that's smaller than your current air filter specifications can handle. Mason Clarke's eyebrows rose slightly. They'd just returned from training exercises in Arizona, information that wasn't publicly available, and certainly wasn't something a small-town mechanic should know. Lucky guess, Mason muttered, but his tone lacked conviction. Not luck, Amanda replied, finally looking up from the diagnostic display. Experience. Your air filter housing shows wear patterns consistent with frequent filter changes in sandy conditions. The brake components have dust accumulation that's characteristic of desert operations. And your cooling system shows signs of operating in extreme temperatures with inadequate airflow, which happens when you're running convoy formations in confined spaces. The garage fell silent except for the soft hum of the diagnostic equipment. Amanda's analysis had moved beyond mechanical expertise into operational intelligence details about how and where the vehicle had been used that shouldn't be accessible to civilian contractors. Trevor found his voice first. Amanda, how do you know all this stuff? I mean, where did you learn to YouTube? Amanda interrupted quickly, but her eyes betrayed her. For just a moment, Tyler caught a flash of something in her expression, pain, perhaps, or the weight of secrets carried too long. YouTube doesn't teach operational analysis, Tyler said quietly, his voice carrying new respect mixed with growing suspicion. What you just described requires first-hand knowledge of military vehicle operations under combat conditions. Amanda's hand stilled on the diagnostic interface. She'd revealed too much, allowed 20 years of careful anonymity to crumble in 20 minutes of professional pride. The curse of expertise was that it demanded recognition, even when recognition was the last thing you wanted. I read a lot, Amanda said weakly, the same defense she'd used countless times over the years. Reading doesn't give you the ability to diagnose operational wear patterns by sight, Chief Torres observed. That comes from experience, real experience. The weight of their attention felt crushing. Amanda had spent 2 decades building a carefully constructed identity as an unremarkable mechanic in an unremarkable town, and she could feel that identity crumbling under the scrutiny of 3 men who specialized in uncovering hidden truths. Lou stepped forward, his business instincts warring with growing curiosity about his employee of 20 years. Amanda, if you've got this kind of knowledge, why haven't you ever? Because sometimes knowing too much is dangerous. Amanda interrupted, her voice carrying an edge that made everyone in the garage take notice. Sometimes it's safer to be underestimated than to be noticed. The statement hung in the air like a confession. Tyler studied Amanda's face with renewed interest, his special operations training helping him read between the lines of her carefully chosen words. People didn't acquire this level of technical expertise and then deliberately hide it unless they had compelling reasons to remain invisible. The repairs will take about 4 hours, Amanda said, returning her attention to the diagnostic display. With deliberate focus. I'll need to flush the transmission, replace the contaminated lubricants, and recalibrate the synchronizers. The differential housing will require welding to address the stress fractures, but it's repairable. And you can do all that here? Tyler asked. I can do all that here, Amanda confirmed, her voice steady despite the chaos in her chest. As Amanda began gathering the tools and materials she'd need for the repairs, Tyler pulled Mason and Torres aside for a whispered conference. Their body language spoke of men making decisions about information that needed to be reported up the chain of command. Amanda caught fragments of their conversation, words like background check and security clearance and need to know that sent ice through her veins. She'd known this day would come eventually. 20 years of hiding had been borrowed time, and the bill was finally coming due. But as she looked at the Humvee waiting for her expertise, Amanda realized that for the first time in 2 decades, she felt alive. The familiar weight of specialized tools in her hands, the satisfaction of diagnosing complex problems, the recognition in Tyler's eyes, it all reminded her of who she used to be before fear made her forget. The question now wasn't whether her secret would be discovered. The question was whether she was ready to remember who she really was. The atmosphere in Castellano's auto service had shifted like weather before a storm. Word of the morning's confrontation spread through Millbrook's tight-knit community with the speed that only small-town gossip could achieve. By lunch, half the town knew that Navy SEALs had visited the garage, and by dinner, speculation about Amanda Brooks had reached fever pitch at Murphy's Diner, and the Copper Mountain Tavern. Amanda arrived early the next morning, as she had every day for 20 years, but found the garage buzzing with an energy that made her stomach clench. The easy camaraderie she'd built with her co-workers over 2 decades felt strained, replaced by sideways glances and hushed conversations that died abruptly when she entered the room. "Morning, Amanda," Trevor called out, but his usual friendly tone carried an undercurrent of uncertainty. He'd spent the previous evening trying to reconcile the woman he'd worked beside for 15 years with the technical expert who diagnosed military equipment with surgical precision. Jesse nodded from behind the parts counter, his greeting more cautious than usual. Only Nina offered her customary warm smile, though even she seemed to be studying Amanda with new eyes, as if trying to see past 2 decades of carefully constructed ordinariness. Lou emerged from his office, carrying a steaming cup of coffee and wearing the expression of a man who'd spent a sleepless night wrestling with questions he'd never thought to ask. His weathered face showed the strain of 20 years of assumptions suddenly proven wrong. "Amanda, we need to talk," Lou said, his voice carrying a gravity that made everyone in the garage pause their morning routines. Her heart sank. The private conversation she'd been dreading was finally here. She followed Lou into his cramped office, noting how he carefully closed the door behind them, something he'd never done in 20 years of employment discussions. The office felt smaller than usual, crowded with yellowed invoices, faded automotive calendars, and the accumulated paperwork of 4 decades in business. Lou settled behind his desk with a heavy sigh, studying Amanda as if seeing her for the first time. "Yesterday changed things," Lou began, his voice careful and measured. "That display with the military vehicle, it's got people talking, asking questions I don't know how to answer." "What kind of questions?" Amanda asked, though she already knew the nature of the inquiries that had been flooding Lou's phone since the SEALs left. "Questions about what kind of operation I'm really running here," Lou replied, his frustration evident. "Whether I'm employing people under false pretenses, whether there's something I should know about my staff that could affect my licenses, my insurance, my contracts." The words stung because they revealed how quickly fear could transform 20 years of reliable service into liability. Amanda had been Lou's most dependable employee, never missed a day, never caused trouble, never complained about wages or working conditions. But none of that mattered when mystery threatened the stability of a small business. "I've never lied on any employment documents," Amanda said quietly. "I've never misrepresented my qualifications or my background. I do the work you ask me to do, and I do it well." "That's just it," Lou's voice carried a note of bewilderment. "You do it too well. Yesterday proved you've been capable of handling our most complex repairs for 20 years, but you've been content changing oil and rotating tires. That doesn't make sense unless," he paused, searching for diplomatic words to express his growing Suspicions, unless what, Lou? Unless you're hiding from something. Unless there's a reason you don't want people to know what you're really capable of. The accusation hung between them like a loaded weapon. Amanda felt the familiar weight of secrets pressing down on her shoulders, the exhausting burden of maintaining a fiction that had defined her adult life. Everyone has a past, Lou. Mine is complicated, but it's not criminal. I've never been arrested, never been charged with anything illegal. I pay my taxes, do my job, and mind my own business. But, Lou pressed, sensing there was more to the story. Amanda sighed, knowing that partial truth was better than continued deception. I used to work on military vehicles. Before I came to Millbrook. It didn't end well, and I came here for a fresh start. What kind of military work? The kind that required security clearances and non-disclosure agreements. The kind that taught me more about advanced automotive systems than I ever wanted to know. Lou leaned back in his chair, processing this information while calculating its potential impact on his business. Military experience wasn't necessarily problematic, but the secrecy surrounding it raised questions he wasn't sure he wanted answered. Why didn't you tell me this when I hired you? Because 20 years ago, you needed someone who could fix cars, and I needed someone who wouldn't ask questions about where I learned to fix them. It was a mutually beneficial arrangement. Before Lou could respond, the garage bay doors chimed with the arrival of another vehicle. Through the office window, Amanda saw a black SUV with government plates pulling into the parking lot. Two men in dark suits emerged, their movements precise and professional in a way that made her blood run cold. Federal agents, she realized. With a sinking heart, Lou followed her gaze and cursed under his breath. Amanda, what the hell did you get my garage involved in? I don't know, she replied honestly, though she suspected Tyler and his team had made inquiries that had triggered official interest in her. Background. The taller of the two men approached the office with the confident stride of someone accustomed to cooperation. Amanda could see his credentials wallet already in his hand, and she knew her carefully constructed anonymity was about to crumble completely. Mr. Castellano? The agent's voice carried the authority of federal law enforcement. I'm Agent Davis with the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. This is Agent Patterson. We'd like to speak with one of your employees about yesterday's incident. Lou's face went pale. In 40 years of running an automotive business, he'd never had federal agents on his property. The implications for his reputation, his contracts, and his livelihood were staggering. Which employee? Lou asked, though his glance toward Amanda made the answer obvious. Amanda Brooks. We understand she recently worked on a military vehicle under unusual circumstances. The next hour unfolded like a slow-motion catastrophe. The agents were polite but thorough, asking questions about Amanda's qualifications, her diagnostic methods, her knowledge of military specifications, and her background prior to arriving in Millbrook. Amanda answered carefully, providing facts while revealing as little as possible about her former life. Miss Brooks, Agent Davis said finally, consulting his tablet, our preliminary investigation suggests you possess expertise that's inconsistent with your current employment history. We're not accusing you of wrongdoing, but we need to understand how a civilian mechanic demonstrates knowledge of classified vehicle systems. I don't have access to classified information, Amanda replied. Honestly, I diagnosed a mechanical problem using publicly available technical knowledge and 20 years of experience. The specific vulnerabilities you identified aren't commonly known, Agent Patterson interjected. They represent security-sensitive information about military vehicle weaknesses. Amanda felt trapped between honesty and self-preservation. Admitting her true background would invite scrutiny she couldn't afford, but continuing to deny her expertise would only make her appear more suspicious. I stay current with automotive technology, she said lamely. I read technical journals, study repair manuals, attend training when possible. The agents exchanged glances that spoke of professionals recognizing evasion when they heard it. Agent Davis pulled out a thick folder, flipping through what appeared to be extensive documentation. "According to our records," Davis said slowly, "Amanda Brooks appeared in Millbrook 20 years ago with minimal documentation of her previous existence. No employment history, limited credit records, no significant digital footprint before arriving in Montana. That level of anonymity requires considerable effort." Amanda's carefully constructed identity was unraveling in real time. She'd been so focused on hiding her military background that she'd made herself interesting to people whose job was investigating anomalies. "I value my privacy," she said. "Privacy is one thing," Patterson replied. "But this level of obscurity suggests someone with compelling reasons to avoid scrutiny." Through the office window, Amanda could see Trevor, Jesse, and Nina pretending to work while obviously straining to hear the conversation. Their faces showed the mixture of curiosity and concern that came with watching a colleague's life implode in federal custody. Lou sat slumped in his chair, probably calculating the cost of a government investigation to his small business. Military contracts had kept the garage profitable for decades, and losing them would mean financial ruin for a man nearing retirement. "I think," Amanda said quietly, "I need to make a phone call." The agents nodded. "We'll wait." As Amanda stepped outside the garage, her hands shaking as she scrolled through contacts she hadn't used in 20 years, she realized her quiet life in Millbrook was over. The past she'd tried so hard to escape was about to collide with the present she'd built, and she wasn't sure either would survive the impact. Amanda's fingers trembled as she found the contact she'd hoped never to use again. Colonel Michael Harrison, her former commanding officer at Ramstein Air Base. The number was 20 years old, probably disconnected, but it was her only link to a world she'd tried to forget. As the phone rang, she watched through the garage windows as federal agents questioned Lou while her co-workers pretended to work. "Colonel Harrison's office. This is Sergeant Major Williams." The crisp military efficiency in the voice transported Amanda back 2 decades instantly. "I need to speak with Colonel Harrison." "Tell him it's Master Sergeant Amanda Brooks calling about Operation Desert Shield maintenance protocols." The pause that followed told her everything. Those weren't random words. They were a coded identification that only someone with legitimate access would know. After 20 years, she was gambling that her former CO would remember both the code and the woman who'd served under his command. "Please hold, Sergeant Brooks." The use of her former rank sent chills down her spine. She hadn't been called sergeant in 20 years, had almost convinced herself that identity belonged to someone else entirely. But standing in the Montana sunshine with federal agents dissecting her carefully constructed civilian life, Amanda felt the weight of her military past settling back onto her shoulders like an old uniform that still fit perfectly. "Amanda? Is that really you?" Colonel Harrison's voice carried the same authority she remembered, though age had added a gravelly quality that spoke of decades in command positions. The fact that he'd taken her call personally confirmed her suspicions. Her former unit was still classified enough to warrant attention from senior officers. "Yes, sir. I'm sorry to contact you after all these years, but I have a situation." "Where are you calling from?" "Millbrook, Montana. I've been working as a civilian mechanic for 20 years, but NCIS agents are asking questions about my background after I diagnosed problems on a Navy SEAL vehicle." The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds. Amanda could picture Harrison processing the implications, a former special operations mechanic surfacing after 2 decades of anonymity, federal agents investigating her current activities, and the potential security concerns that came with both scenarios. "Amanda, I need you to listen carefully. Don't say anything else over an unsecured line. Give me your location, and I'll have someone there within 6 hours. Until then, cooperate with the agents But don't volunteer information about your service record. Sir, I just need to know if I'm in trouble. These agents seem to think I have access to classified information because I know military vehicle systems. You have access to classified information, Harrison replied bluntly. 20 years doesn't erase what you learned or saw during your deployment. The question is whether you've compromised that information, intentionally or otherwise. The words hit Amanda like a physical blow. She'd spent 2 decades trying to forget her military service, deliberately avoiding anything that might connect her to her former life. But the knowledge remained, embedded in her mind like shrapnel that couldn't be safely removed. I haven't compromised anything, sir. I've been careful to. We'll discuss this in person. Sit tight, keep your mouth shut, and remember that you took an oath that doesn't have an expiration date. The line went dead, leaving Amanda staring at her phone while processing the implications of Harrison's words. She wasn't just a former mechanic with specialized knowledge. She was a security asset who'd been living under unofficial cover for 20 years. Her anonymity hadn't been hiding from the military. It had been protecting military secrets. Inside the garage, Agent Davis was reviewing documents with Lou, while Agent Patterson took photographs of Amanda's work area. The methodical efficiency of their investigation suggested this wasn't a routine inquiry. They were building a comprehensive file on someone they considered a potential security risk. Amanda walked back into the garage with as much composure as she could muster. The federal agents looked up expectantly, clearly hoping her phone call had provided answers to their questions. I've contacted someone who can help clarify my background, Amanda said carefully. They should be here this afternoon. Who did you contact? Davis asked. My former commanding officer. He'll be able to verify my service record and explain any questions about my qualifications. The agents exchanged glances that spoke of professionals recognizing a significant development. Military involvement elevated the situation beyond a simple background check. It suggested security clearances, classified operations, and the kind of complications that required careful handling. What branch of service? Patterson asked. Air Force. I was stationed at Ramstein Air Base in Germany, with deployments to various locations in the Middle East. Lou's jaw dropped. In 20 years, Amanda had never mentioned military service, let alone overseas deployments. The woman he'd known as a quiet, unremarkable mechanic was revealing layers of complexity that challenged everything he thought he knew about her. What was your specialty? Davis pressed. Heavy equipment maintenance and repair. I worked on everything from transport vehicles to specialized equipment used in forward operating bases. It was the truth, though heavily edited. Amanda had indeed been a heavy equipment specialist, but her actual role had involved maintaining vehicles and equipment for classified special operations missions. She'd been one of only 12 people in the Air Force qualified to service certain experimental systems, and her security clearance had been high enough to require polygraph examinations. Every 6 months, Trevor stepped closer, his curiosity overcoming his caution. Amanda, why didn't you ever mention you were a veteran? We've had military contracts for years. Your experience would have been valuable. Because sometimes the past is better left buried, Amanda replied, her voice carrying a weight that made everyone in the garage pause. Some experiences change you in ways that make civilian life complicated. Nina recognized the tone immediately. Her brother had returned from Afghanistan with the same careful way of speaking about his service, the same reluctance to discuss experiences that had shaped him in fundamental ways. She'd learned not to press for details that might open wounds. Still healing decades later, the garage door chimed again, and Amanda's heart sank as she saw Commander Tyler Reed entering with his 2 teammates. The Navy SEALs had returned, probably drawn by reports of federal investigators asking questions about yesterday's incident. Agents, Tyler nodded to Davis and Patterson with the professional courtesy of one government employee acknowledging. Others, I understand you're investigating yesterday's diagnostic work, Commander Reed, Davis replied. We're trying to understand how a civilian contractor demonstrated knowledge of classified vehicle vulnerabilities. Tyler studied Amanda with renewed interest, his special operations training helping him read the subtle changes in her demeanor. Yesterday, she'd been defensive and evasive. Today, she carried herself with the bearing of someone who'd made peace with inevitable exposure. What did you find? Tyler asked. Miss Brooks claims to be a former Air Force mechanic with overseas deployment experience, Patterson said. She's contacted her former commanding officer to verify her service record. Tyler's eyebrows rose slightly. Military service would explain Amanda's technical expertise, but it also raised new questions about why she'd hidden her background and what kind of classified knowledge she might possess. What unit? Tyler asked Amanda directly. 823rd Expeditionary Maintenance Squadron, Amanda replied, knowing that Tyler would recognize the designation as Special Operations Support. Tyler's expression shifted completely. The 823rd was legendary within special operations communities. Unit responsible for maintaining equipment that officially didn't exist for missions that never happened. Personnel from that unit didn't become small-town mechanics by accident. Holy shit, Mason Clarke whispered, earning sharp looks from the federal agents. Language, petty officer, Tyler said automatically, but his attention remained fixed on Amanda. Miss Brooks, I think we need to have a much longer conversation. As the garage filled with military personnel and federal investigators, Amanda realized that her 20-year exile was officially over. The question now wasn't whether her secret would be exposed. It was whether she was ready to face the consequences of living a lie for 2 decades. Outside, storm clouds were gathering over the Montana mountains, and Amanda couldn't shake the feeling that the weather was about to match the chaos engulfing her carefully ordered life. The black helicopter appeared over the Montana horizon like a mechanical vulture, its rotor wash bending the prairie grass as it settled onto the makeshift landing zone behind Castellano's auto service. Amanda watched through the garage windows as 3 figures emerged from the aircraft, 2 in military dress uniforms and 1 in civilian clothes that screamed federal authority. Colonel Michael Harrison looked older than Amanda remembered, his hair now silver and his face bearing the weathered lines of a career spent managing classified operations. But his bearing remained unmistakably military, straight-backed, alert, and radiating the kind of presence that made civilians instinctively defer to his authority. Beside him walked a woman Amanda didn't recognize, tall, sharp-eyed, wearing the kind of expensive suit that suggested Washington origins. The third figure made Amanda's blood run cold. Master Sergeant Patricia Hendricks, her former team leader and the woman who'd taught her everything about maintaining equipment that officially didn't exist. Jesus Christ, Amanda, Hendricks said, as she entered the garage, her voice carrying 20 years of accumulated frustration. When you disappeared, you really disappeared. Do you have any idea how many people have been looking for you? I wasn't hiding from the military, Amanda replied carefully, aware that every word was being recorded by multiple agencies. I was trying to build a civilian life. Colonel Harrison surveyed the garage with the practiced eye of someone evaluating operational security. His gaze lingered on the federal agents, the Navy SEALs, and the civilian mechanics who were witnessing the systematic destruction of Amanda's carefully constructed anonymity. We need somewhere private to talk, Harrison said to Lou. And we need everyone without appropriate clearances to leave the immediate area. Lou's face went pale. This is my business, Colonel. I can't just— Yes, you can, the woman in the expensive suit interrupted, producing credentials that made Lou's objections die in his throat. Deputy Director Sarah Chun, Defense Security Service. This facility is now under temporary federal oversight, pending resolution of security concerns. Trevor, Jesse, and Nina were escorted to the far end of the garage while the federal agents, Navy SEALs and Amanda's former colleagues gathered around her workstation. The casual atmosphere of a small-town auto shop had transformed into something resembling a classified briefing. "Amanda," Colonel Harrison began, his voice carrying the weight of official authority, "I need you to understand the gravity of this situation. Your former unit has been the subject of ongoing security reviews for the past 5 years. 3 former members have been investigated for potential breaches of classified information." "I haven't breached anything," Amanda said quickly. "I've been changing oil and rotating tires for 20 years. I haven't had contact with anyone from my former unit. Haven't discussed my service record. Haven't you diagnosed classified vulnerabilities in military equipment using knowledge that should have been compartmentalized," Deputy Director Chen interrupted. "That constitutes a potential security breach regardless of your intentions." Hendricks stepped forward, her expression mixing professional concern with personal disappointment. "Amanda, the 823rd wasn't just any maintenance unit. We serviced equipment for operations that are still classified. The knowledge in your head could compromise ongoing missions if it fell into the wrong hands." "It hasn't fallen into anyone's hands," Amanda protested. "I've spent 20 years deliberately avoiding anything connected to my military service. Until yesterday," Agent Davis observed, "when you demonstrated expertise that revealed the full extent of your capabilities." Tyler Reed had been listening to the exchange with growing understanding. Special operations units operated in shadows, their personnel sworn to secrecy about missions and equipment that couldn't be acknowledged officially. Amanda's background explained not just her technical expertise, but her desperate need for anonymity. "What exactly did she work on?" Tyler asked Harrison directly. "Classified," Harrison replied automatically, then reconsidered. "But given your clearance level and current investigation, I can tell you that Sergeant Brooks was part of a 12-person team responsible for maintaining experimental vehicles and equipment used in deep reconnaissance missions." "Experimental how?" Tyler pressed. Hendricks glanced at Harrison, who nodded slightly. "Stealth modifications, advanced communication systems, weapons platforms that were being field tested under combat conditions. The kind of equipment that couldn't be serviced through normal military channels." Amanda felt the weight of 20 years of secrets pressing down on her shoulders. She tried so hard to forget those missions, midnight maintenance calls and forward operating bases, working on vehicles that would disappear into the desert, carrying special operations teams on missions she was never briefed about, troubleshooting systems that existed in classification levels above her security clearance. "The work we did," Amanda said quietly, "it saved lives. American lives. That equipment we maintained allowed special operations teams to complete missions that conventional forces couldn't handle. And the knowledge required to maintain that equipment," Chun added, "remains classified at the highest levels. Which is why your civilian employment represents a potential security risk." Lou, who had been following the conversation with growing bewilderment, finally found his voice. "Are you saying Amanda's been some kind of spy for 20 years? "No," Harrison replied firmly. "We're saying she's been a security asset living under unofficial cover, whether she realized it or not. Her technical knowledge makes her valuable to foreign intelligence services, and her anonymity has been protecting both her and national security interests." The implications hit Amanda like a physical blow. She hadn't been hiding from her past, she'd been protecting it. Her carefully constructed civilian identity hadn't been cowardice. It had been an extension of her military service, keeping classified knowledge secure through isolation and anonymity. "The helicopter outside," Tyler observed, "suggests this isn't a routine security review." "It's not," Chun confirmed. 3 weeks ago, we intercepted communications indicating that foreign intelligence services are actively seeking former members of Amanda's unit. Someone is trying to recruit personnel with knowledge of classified systems. Which is why, Hendricks added, we've been conducting security reviews of all former 823rd personnel. Some have been relocated, others have been brought back into active service, and a few double quotes, she paused meaningfully. A few have simply vanished. The garage fell silent except for the distant hum of the helicopter's cooling engines. Amanda realized that her exposure wasn't just about yesterday's diagnostic work. It was about survival in a world where knowledge of classified systems made her a target for enemies she'd hoped never to face again. What happens now? Amanda asked, though she dreaded the answer. Now, Harrison said, we figure out how to keep you alive while deciding whether your security clearance can be reactivated, or whether you represent too great a risk to remain in civilian life. Tyler studied Amanda with new respect and growing concern. Yesterday, he dismissed her as an incompetent mechanic. Today, he was looking at a former Special Operations Support Specialist whose knowledge was valuable enough to attract foreign intelligence attention and dangerous enough to require federal protection. The question, Chun said, addressing the room, is whether Amanda Brooks, the civilian mechanic, can continue to exist, or whether Master Sergeant Brooks needs to be officially recalled to active duty for her own protection. As thunder rumbled over the Montana mountains and the first drops of rain began spattering against the garage windows, Amanda realized that her 20-year exile was ending not with vindication, but with the terrifying prospect of being drawn back into a world she'd fought so hard to escape. The rain drummed against the garage roof like automatic weapons fire, triggering memories Amanda had spent 2 decades trying to suppress. She stood in the center of a circle formed by federal agents, Navy SEALs, and her former military colleagues, feeling like a defendant awaiting verdict in a trial where the charges kept changing. Before we discuss your future, Colonel Harrison said, his voice cutting through the ambient noise of the storm, we need to address why you disappeared in the first place. Your service record shows an exemplary career right up until your discharge. But the circumstances of your departure were unusual. Amanda's hands clenched into fists at her sides. She'd known this moment would come eventually, the day she'd have to explain why Master Sergeant Amanda Brooks had vanished into the civilian world without a trace, abandoning a military career that had defined her identity for over a decade. There was an incident, Amanda said quietly, her voice barely audible above the rain. During my final deployment, equipment failure led to casualties, and there were questions about whether proper maintenance protocols had been followed. What kind? OF questions? Deputy Director Chun asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Amanda closed her eyes, allowing herself to remember the morning that had changed everything. Forward Operating Base Falcon, Iraq, 2004, a convoy of experimental reconnaissance vehicles preparing for a classified mission into insurgent territory. Equipment she'd personally certified as mission-ready. 3 vehicles from the 823rd Maintenance Pool were involved in an IED attack during a special reconnaissance mission, Amanda continued, her voice growing stronger despite the pain of remembering. 1 vehicle's armor plating failed catastrophically. 2 soldiers died. 3 more were critically wounded. Master Sergeant Hendricks shifted uncomfortably, clearly remembering the same incident. The investigation found that the armor plating had been improperly installed, Amanda interrupted, her voice carrying 20 years of accumulated guilt. By me, I had followed the manufacturer's specifications exactly, but those specifications were wrong. The bolt pattern for the armor attachment points had been incorrectly translated from metric to standard measurements. Tyler Reed studied Amanda's face, recognizing the expression of someone who'd carried survivor's guilt for decades. Special operations personnel were familiar with equipment failures that cost lives and the psychological aftermath that followed. A measurement error, Agent Davis observed. That hardly seems like grounds for disappearing from military service. "You don't understand," Amanda replied, her voice growing heated. "Those soldiers died because I trusted specifications that I should have questioned. I had the expertise to recognize the potential failure point, but I followed orders instead of using my judgment." "That's not how the investigation concluded," Harrison said carefully. "The Board of Inquiry found that the manufacturer had provided faulty specifications to multiple units. You were specifically cleared of any wrongdoing." "Officially." "Yes," Amanda agreed. "But clearing my record didn't bring back Corporal Martinez or Sergeant Thompson. It didn't undo the fact that I'd personally signed off on equipment that failed when those men needed it most." The garage fell silent except for the steady rhythm of rain against metal roofing. Amanda's colleagues, both military and civilian, were beginning to understand why she'd chosen 20 years of anonymity over the recognition her skills deserved. Lou, who had been listening with growing comprehension, finally spoke up. "So you came here to punish yourself. 20 years of working below your abilities because you blamed yourself for something that wasn't your fault." "I came here to disappear," Amanda corrected. "To make sure my arrogance could never cost lives again." "And instead," Chen observed, "you've been protecting classified knowledge through self-imposed exile. Your guilt became an inadvertent security protocol." Nina Santos, who had been standing with the other civilian mechanics, stepped forward despite Agent Davis's gesture for her to remain back. "Amanda, I lost my brother in Afghanistan. IED attack, equipment failure, same kind of tragedy you're describing." Amanda looked up, meeting Nina's eyes for the first time since the revelations had begun. "For years, I blamed his mechanic, his unit commander, everyone who'd touched his vehicle before that final patrol," Nina continued. "But eventually, I realized that blame was just another way of avoiding the real truth, that war kills good people. And sometimes there's no one to blame except the circumstances we can't control." "It's different when you're responsible." "No, it's not," Nina interrupted firmly. "Responsibility means doing your best with the information you have. It doesn't mean being omniscient. It doesn't mean being perfect." Tyler had been studying Amanda throughout this exchange, his special operations experience helping him recognize the psychological profile of someone carrying operational guilt. "How many lives did your maintenance work save?" he asked suddenly. "What? In your years with the 823rd, how many successful missions did the equipment you maintained support? How many soldiers came home because their vehicles and equipment functioned properly under combat conditions?" Amanda stared at him, clearly having never considered the question from that perspective. "Hundreds," Hendricks answered for her. "Maybe thousands." Amanda's maintenance protocols were adopted as standard procedure across special operations units. Her innovations in field repair techniques are still being taught at military technical schools. "But 2 men died, and hundreds lived," Tyler said bluntly. "That's the mathematics of military service. You can't save everyone, but you can. Save who you can. The question is whether you're going to honor those you saved or spend the rest of your life mourning those you couldn't." Colonel Harrison consulted his tablet, scrolling through what appeared to be extensive documentation. "Amanda, there's something you need to know about those specifications. The manufacturer's error wasn't accidental. The company was later investigated for providing intentionally flawed technical data to military contractors as part of a foreign intelligence operation." Amanda felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you were sabotaged," Harrison replied grimly. "The bolt pattern error was designed to cause exactly the kind of failure that killed those soldiers. You followed specifications that were deliberately wrong, provided by enemy agents working within the defense industry." "Jesus," Mason Clarke whispered. "She's been blaming herself for 20 years for an enemy action." The revelation hit Amanda like a physical blow. 20 years of guilt, 20 years of self-imposed exile, 20 years of refusing to use her talents, all based on the assumption that her mistake had cost lives. The truth was that enemy agents had cost those lives, using her dedication to proper procedures as a weapon against American forces. The investigation was classified, Chun explained. We couldn't reveal the sabotage without compromising ongoing counterintelligence operations. Your service record shows the facts we could share, but not the full truth. Amanda sank into a nearby chair, overwhelmed by the implications of what she'd just learned. Her self-imposed punishment had been based on a lie, and her exile had been protecting secrets from enemies who'd already demonstrated their willingness to kill American soldiers through technical sabotage. What happens now? She asked again, though this time the question carried different weight. Now, Harrison said, we discuss whether you're ready to stop hiding from a past that was never your fault, and start using your skills to prevent future tragedies. The storm outside was beginning to pass, but Amanda could feel a different kind of tempest gathering, the prospect of reclaiming an identity she'd thought was lost forever. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The transformation in the garage was palpable as Amanda absorbed the truth about her past. 20 years of self-imposed exile, built on a foundation of misplaced guilt, crumbled in the span of 30 minutes. She looked around at the faces surrounding her: federal agents, Navy SEALs, her former military colleagues, and the civilian mechanics who'd worked beside her for years without knowing her true identity. I need some air, Amanda said quietly, standing on unsteady legs. Colonel Harrison nodded. Take your time. This is a lot to process. Amanda walked outside into the aftermath of the Montana storm. The air was crisp and clean, washed by rain that had passed as quickly as it had arrived. Behind her, she could hear muffled conversations as various agencies discussed her future. But for the moment, she needed silence to reconcile the woman she'd been with the woman she'd become. Trevor Hayes appeared beside her, his coverall still stained with the honest work of automotive repair. 20 years, he said simply. 20 years you've been here, and we never knew. I didn't want you to know, Amanda replied. I thought I was protecting everyone by staying invisible. From what? From knowing that one of the most skilled mechanics in the country was working in our garage? From understanding that we had a genuine hero changing oil and rotating tires? I'm not a hero, Trevor. Heroes don't get people killed. According to what we just heard, you didn't get anyone killed. Enemy agents did. You were just the weapon they used, and you've been punishing yourself for their crime. The simple clarity of Trevor's words cut through 20 years of psychological complexity. Amanda had been so focused on her perceived failure that she'd never considered herself a victim of enemy action. The soldiers who died had been casualties of war, not casualties of her incompetence. Jesse Park and Nina Santos joined them outside, their faces showing the mixture of awe and concern that came with watching a colleague's entire identity shift. In real time. So what happens now? Jesse asked. Do you go back to the military? Do you leave Millbrook? I don't know, Amanda admitted. For 20 years, I've known exactly who I was and what I was doing. Now I feel like I'm starting over again. Good, Nina said firmly. Starting over means you get to choose who you want to be instead of letting guilt make the choice for you. Through the garage windows, Amanda could see heated discussions taking place between her former commanding officer, the federal agents, and the Navy SEALs. Occasionally, gestures in her direction suggested she was the primary topic of conversation. Lou Castellano emerged from the garage, his face showing the strain of having his quiet business transformed into a federal incident. Amanda, they want to talk to you again. Something about job offers and security clearances and opportunities that sound way above my pay grade. Amanda nodded, straightening her shoulders with a decisiveness that surprised her. The 20-year victim was gone, replaced by someone ready to face whatever consequences came with reclaiming her true identity. Inside the garage, The various officials had arranged themselves around her workstation like a military briefing. Colonel Harrison held a tablet displaying what appeared to be official documentation, while Deputy Director Chun consulted a thick folder marked with classification stamps. "Amanda," Harrison began, "we've been discussing your options. Given the security concerns and your demonstrated expertise, several agencies have expressed interest in bringing you back into federal service." "What kind of service?" Amanda asked. "The Pentagon is offering to reinstate your security clearance and bring you back as a senior technical advisor," Chun replied. "You'd be working on next-generation military vehicle systems, applying lessons learned from 20 years of field experience to improve equipment design and maintenance protocols." Tyler Reed stepped forward. "Naval Special Warfare Command has a different proposal. We need someone who understands both the technical specifications of our equipment and the real-world conditions our teams face. Your combination of engineering, expertise, and practical experience is exactly what we're looking for in a civilian contractor." "Contractor work means you'd keep your civilian status," Hendricks added. "But you'd be working on classified projects with appropriate security oversight. It's a way to serve without returning to active duty." Amanda looked around the garage that had been her home for 2 decades, at the tools and workbenches that had been her refuge from a past she'd thought was shameful. The irony wasn't lost on her. The place she'd chosen to hide her abilities was being offered as the foundation for reclaiming them. "There's a third option," Harrison said carefully. "You could stay here in Millbrook and establish a civilian training facility for military mechanics. A place where active duty personnel could learn advanced diagnostic and repair techniques from someone with both theoretical knowledge and practical experience." "You mean turn the garage into a school?" Lou asked, his business instincts suddenly alert. "A specialized training center," Chun clarified, "with appropriate security measures and federal funding." Lou's garage would become the primary facility, but the program would be Amanda's to design and implement. The proposal hit Amanda like lightning. She could stay in the community that had become her home, maintain the relationship she'd built, and use her expertise to train the next generation of military mechanics. It was a way to honor both her past service and her civilian growth. "What would that look like?" Amanda asked. "You'd design curriculum that combines advanced technical training with practical field experience," Harrison explained. "Military mechanics would rotate through 6-month programs, learning from someone who's actually maintained equipment under combat conditions." Tyler nodded approvingly. "Special operations units desperately need mechanics who can think beyond textbook procedures. Someone who can improvise solutions under pressure, who understands that equipment failure in the field isn't just an inconvenience, it's a life or death situation. And the security concerns would be managed through appropriate clearance levels for students and instructors," Chun replied. "The facility would be classified, but Amanda would be free to live and work in the community she's chosen." Amanda looked at Trevor, Jesse, and Nina, who had been listening with growing excitement. "What about my co-workers? They've been part of this garage longer than they've known me. They deserve consideration too." "Actually," Henderson said with a slight smile, "we were hoping they'd consider becoming instructors as well. Military mechanics need to understand civilian perspectives on vehicle maintenance. The combination of military precision and civilian innovation could revolutionize how we approach field repairs." Lou's eyes widened as he calculated the implications. "You're talking about transforming my garage into a federal training facility. The contracts alone would secure your retirement and provide steady employment for everyone currently working here," Chun confirmed. "Plus expansion opportunities and the kind of prestige that comes with being the primary training facility for elite military mechanics." Amanda felt tears threatening as she contemplated the possibility. 20 years ago, she'd arrived in Millbrook broken and seeking invisibility. Now she was being offered the chance to transform her exile into purpose, her guilt into service, and her hiding place into a beacon for others seeking to serve their country. "I need to think about it," Amanda said, though her heart was already racing with possibilities. "Of course," Harrison replied. "But Amanda, don't take too long. The world needs people like you, people who understand that service isn't about perfection. It's about dedication to something larger than yourself." As the various officials began gathering their materials and discussing logistics, Amanda realized that her story wasn't ending, it was beginning again, with the wisdom that only comes from surviving your worst mistakes and discovering they weren't mistakes at all. 3 days later, Amanda found herself standing in the same garage bay where everything had started. But the space felt entirely different. Where once she'd worked in deliberate anonymity, now she was surrounded by blueprints, technical specifications, and federal contracts that would transform Castellano's auto service into the advanced military vehicle training center. The speed of the transformation was dizzying. Pentagon procurement officers had arrived within 24 hours of her decision, followed by security specialists, curriculum designers, and enough paperwork to stock a small library. Lou walked around in a daze, clutching contracts that guaranteed more federal funding than his garage had seen in 40 years of operation. "I still can't believe this is happening," Trevor said, reviewing the instructor certification requirements he'd need to complete. 3 days ago, I was worried about making rent. Now I'm being offered a federal teaching position with security clearance." "Believe it," Nina replied, studying schematics for training equipment that would arrive within the month. "My brother would have given anything for this kind of advanced training before his deployment. This could save lives." Amanda watched her colleagues adapt to their new reality with the same determination they'd shown in learning automotive repair. The transition from civilian mechanics to military instructors wouldn't be easy, but their practical experience would be invaluable to soldiers who needed to understand how equipment really behaved under field conditions. Jesse approached with a tablet displaying the facility's proposed organizational chart. "Amanda, they want you to review the staffing structure. Apparently, you're listed as Director of Technical Training, which sounds important and terrifying." "It is both," Amanda admitted, accepting the tablet with hands that only trembled slightly. The position represented everything she'd once been, and everything she'd become: a fusion of military expertise and civilian wisdom that could genuinely revolutionize how the armed forces approached vehicle maintenance. Commander Tyler Reed entered the garage with 2 other Navy SEALs Amanda didn't recognize. His expression carried the satisfaction of someone whose instincts had been vindicated by subsequent events. "Dr. Brooks," Tyler said, using the title that reflected her newly acknowledged expertise, "I wanted you to meet Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez and Petty Officer Williams. They'll be among the first students in your training program." Amanda studied the 2 SEALs, recognizing the same mixture of skepticism and curiosity that Tyler had shown during their initial encounter. Both were younger than Tyler, probably veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan deployments where equipment failure could mean the difference between successful missions and casualty reports. "Chief Rodriguez," Amanda said, extending her hand. "What's your experience with vehicle maintenance under field conditions?" "Enough to know that textbook procedures don't always work when you're being shot at," Rodriguez replied with a slight smile. "I've heard you understand that particular challenge." "Among others," Amanda confirmed. "The goal of this program is to bridge the gap between what the manuals say should work and what actually works when everything goes wrong simultaneously." Petty Officer Williams looked around the garage with professional interest. "Will you be teaching on actual military equipment?" "The latest versions of everything special operations units currently deploy," Tyler confirmed, "plus experimental systems that are still in development. The Pentagon wants operators who can maintain and repair equipment they've never seen before." using principles rather than memorized procedures. Amanda felt a familiar thrill at the prospect of working with cutting-edge technology again. 20 years of changing oil had been safe, but it had also been intellectually stifling. The opportunity to engage with complex systems, to solve problems that required creativity as well as technical knowledge, appealed to parts of her mind that had been dormant for decades. Master Sergeant Hendricks arrived with a convoy of military trucks carrying equipment that would transform the garage into a sophisticated training facility. Amanda watched as diagnostic computers, specialized tools, and training vehicles were unloaded with the precision that characterized all military logistics operations. "Your new toys," Hendricks said with a grin. "Some of this equipment is so advanced that even I don't know how it works. That's why we need instructors who can figure it out on the fly." "What about security?" Lou asked, watching federal agents install surveillance equipment and access controls. "This is starting to look like a military installation." "Because it essentially is," Deputy Director Chun replied, emerging from a black SUV with additional documentation. "This facility will have the same security protocols as any classified installation, but with the flexibility to maintain its civilian character for community relations." Amanda understood the delicate balance they were trying to achieve. The training center needed to be secure enough to handle classified equipment and techniques, but integrated enough into Millbrook's community to avoid creating resentment or suspicion among longtime residents. "Have you considered how the town will react to this transformation?" Amanda asked Chun. "Military installations aren't always welcome in small communities." "Actually," Chun replied with a slight smile, "we've already conducted preliminary community outreach. The economic impact analysis suggests that this facility will create over 200 jobs and bring millions of dollars in federal investment to Millbrook." The town council voted unanimously to support the project. Trevor laughed. "Leave it to Amanda to worry about everyone else when she's the one whose life is being turned upside down." But Amanda's concerns were genuine. She'd spent 20 years as part of Millbrook's community, building relationships based on her identity as a quiet, unremarkable mechanic. The transition to federal contractor and training director would inevitably change those relationships, possibly in ways she couldn't predict or control. "There's something else," Colonel Harrison said, arriving with yet another folder of documents. "The Air Force wants to discuss awarding you the Distinguished Service Medal for your work with the 823rd Expeditionary Maintenance Squadron. The classification restrictions that prevented recognition 20 years ago have been lifted." Amanda stared at him in shock. Military decorations had never been part of her expectations. She'd been so focused on avoiding recognition that the possibility of receiving honors for her service had never occurred to her. "I don't need medals," she said quietly. "Maybe not," Harrison replied, "but the Air Force needs to acknowledge what you accomplished, and the soldiers whose lives you saved deserve to know that their survival wasn't accidental. It was the result of exceptional skill and dedication." Nina stepped closer, her voice carrying the emotional weight of someone who'd lost family in military service. "Amanda, my brother never got the chance to thank the mechanics who kept his equipment running for 11 months before that final mission. Let the Air Force thank you on behalf of all the soldiers who came home because of your work." As Amanda contemplated the prospect of receiving official recognition for service she'd spent 20 years trying to forget, she realized that healing wasn't just about personal forgiveness. It was about allowing others to express gratitude that had been withheld by classification and circumstance. "When?" she asked Harrison. "Next month. At the Pentagon. With full honors and media coverage. If you're willing. The Air Force wants your story to inspire other women considering military technical careers." Amanda looked around the garage that had been her refuge and was becoming her platform. The scared, guilt-ridden woman who'd arrived in Millbrook 20 years ago was gone, replaced by someone ready to serve again, not despite her past, but because of everything it had taught her about resilience, community, and the true meaning of service. 6 months later, the Advanced Military Vehicle Training Center had transformed not just Castellano's auto service, but the entire character of Millbrook, Montana. What had once been a sleepy agricultural town now buzzed with the controlled energy of a military installation, yet somehow maintained its small-town warmth and community spirit. Amanda stood in the main training bay, watching Chief Rodriguez demonstrate advanced diagnostic techniques to a class of 12 military mechanics from various branches of service. The students ranging from fresh-faced privates to seasoned sergeants hung on every word as Rodriguez explained how to identify transmission problems by sound alone, a skill he'd learned from Amanda during his first week at the facility. The key, Rodriguez was saying, is understanding that every mechanical system has its own language. Dr. Brooks taught me that if you listen carefully enough, equipment will tell you exactly what's wrong before catastrophic failure occurs. Amanda smiled at hearing her techniques translated through Rodriguez's experience. The cross-pollination of knowledge between instructor and student was creating innovations neither could have achieved alone. Military precision combined with civilian creativity was producing diagnostic methods that were already being adopted by special operations units worldwide. Trevor Hayes approached with a tablet displaying the latest performance metrics. His transformation from small-town mechanic to federal instructor had been remarkable. His natural teaching ability, combined with newly acquired theoretical knowledge, made him one of the facility's most effective educators. Amanda, the Pentagon evaluation team, wants to review these numbers with you, Trevor said, his voice carrying pride mixed with amazement. Our graduates are diagnosing field problems 30% faster than conventionally trained mechanics, and their improvised repair success rate is unprecedented. What's driving the improvement? Amanda asked, though she suspected she knew. The answer, confidence, Trevor replied. We're teaching them to think like engineers while working like mechanics. Instead of following procedures blindly, they're learning to understand the underlying principles that make equipment work. Nina Santos joined them, carrying documentation from the latest class evaluation. Her evolution had been equally impressive. Her natural empathy and communication skills made her exceptional at helping students overcome the psychological barriers that prevented creative problem-solving under pressure. The psychological profiles are even more encouraging, Nina reported. Students are showing increased stress tolerance and improved decision-making under simulated combat conditions. They're not just better mechanics, they're better soldiers. Amanda reviewed the data with satisfaction that went beyond professional pride. The training center was proving that technical education could be transformative when it addressed both intellectual and emotional development. Students weren't just learning to fix equipment, they were learning to trust their own judgment and adapt to unexpected challenges. Jesse Park emerged from the Advanced Electronics Lab, where he'd been working with Petty Officer Williams on experimental communication systems. His specialized knowledge of automotive electronics had translated perfectly to military applications, and his patient teaching style helped students master complex concepts without intimidation. Amanda, the Navy wants to discuss expanding the communications training program, Jesse said, his excitement obvious. They're seeing significant improvements in field communication reliability from our graduates. What kind of expansion? Full electromagnetic warfare resistance training, teaching mechanics to maintain communication systems that can function in electronic attack environments. The request represented another level of trust from the military establishment. Electromagnetic warfare countermeasures were among the most classified aspects of modern military technology, and expanding the training program to include those systems would require additional security clearances and facility modifications. Commander Tyler Reed entered the training bay with a delegation of Pentagon officials. their expressions showing the satisfaction of people whose investment had exceeded expectations. Tyler's role had evolved from skeptical customer to program advocate, and his recommendations had been instrumental in securing continued funding and expansion approval. "Dr. Brooks," Tyler said formally, though his smile was genuine, "I'd like you to meet General Patricia Morrison, Air Force Deputy Chief of Staff for Logistics. She's here to discuss some rather significant opportunities." General Morrison was a small woman whose presence filled the room completely. Her uniform bore the ribbons and insignia of someone who'd spent decades managing complex military operations, and her direct gaze suggested she didn't waste time on diplomatic niceties. "Dr. Brooks, your training program has achieved results that frankly surprised everyone at the Pentagon," Morrison said without preamble. "Equipment failure rates among your graduates are 60% below military averages, and their mission success rates are correspondingly higher. The students deserve the credit, General. We're just providing them with tools they already possessed." "Modest and accurate," Morrison replied approvingly. "Which is why I'm here to discuss expanding this model to additional locations. The Air Force wants to establish similar training centers at 3 bases, using your curriculum and methods." Amanda felt the familiar mixture of pride and apprehension that came with recognition. Success brought opportunities, but it also brought expectations and responsibilities that could quickly become overwhelming. What would that expansion look like? You would design the programs and train the instructors, but each facility would operate independently under local command. Think of it as franchising your methods rather than centralizing them under your direct control. Castellano, who had been listening from his new office overlooking the training floor, approached with the expression of someone still amazed by his transformed business. At 70, he'd become the civilian administrator of a federal training facility worth more than most small colleges. "General Morrison," Lou said, "before Amanda commits to additional responsibilities, I think you should understand what she's already accomplished here. This facility isn't just training better mechanics, it's transforming how the military thinks about technical education." "Explain." "Traditional military training focuses on compliance and standardization," Lou continued. "Amanda's program emphasizes understanding and adaptation. Students learn to think for themselves while maintaining military discipline. It's a balance that took her 20 years of civilian experience to perfect." General Morrison studied Amanda with renewed interest. "Is Mr. Castellano correct? Are you teaching military personnel to question procedures?" "I'm teaching them to understand procedures well enough to modify them when circumstances require it," Amanda clarified. "Military equipment fails in combat because real-world conditions don't match laboratory specifications. Our graduates learn to bridge that gap." "And the military accepts this approach?" Tyler stepped forward. "General, I've seen Dr. Brooks' graduates maintain equipment under conditions that would stump conventionally trained mechanics. They're not abandoning military discipline, they're applying it more intelligently." Morrison nodded slowly. "Dr. Brooks, the expansion program would include significant autonomy in curriculum design and instructor selection. The Air Force recognizes that bureaucratic interference could destroy exactly what makes this program effective." Amanda looked around the training bay that had become her life's work. Students from various military branches worked alongside civilian instructors who'd once been her garage colleagues. Equipment that had seemed impossibly advanced 6 months ago was now routine training material. The integration of military precision with civilian innovation had created something genuinely revolutionary. "I'll consider it," Amanda said finally. "But any expansion has to maintain the community integration that makes this program work. Military training shouldn't be isolated from civilian perspectives." "Agreed," Morrison replied. "In fact, that's exactly what we're hoping to replicate. The Pentagon is beginning to understand that the best military solutions often come from civilian insights. As the delegation concluded their visit and began discussing implementation timelines, Amanda realized that her journey from exile to recognition was becoming something even more significant, a transformation of how America's military approached the relationship between technical knowledge and practical wisdom. The scared mechanic, who'd hidden in Millbrook for 20 years, had become an architect of military education reform, proving that sometimes the most valuable service comes not from following orders, but from having the courage to question them. 1 year later, Amanda stood on the stage of the Pentagon's Medal of Honor reception hall, wearing her Air Force dress uniform for the first time in over 2 decades. The Distinguished Service Medal hung heavy against her chest, but the weight felt different than she'd expected, not burdensome, but grounding, like an anchor connecting her to a legacy of service she'd finally learned to embrace. The ceremony had drawn an audience that reflected the full scope of her impact. In the front rows sat her colleagues from Millbrook: Trevor, Nina, Jesse, and Lou, all wearing their best clothes and expressions of amazed pride. Behind them were military officials from every branch of service, representatives from defense, contractors, and members of Congress who'd championed the expansion of her training program. Master Sergeant Amanda Brooks, the Air Force Chief of Staff, announced, his voice carrying through the hushed auditorium, exemplified the highest standards of military service through technical excellence, innovative problem-solving, and dedication to the safety of American forces under the most challenging conditions. As Amanda accepted the medal, she caught sight of a familiar face in the audience, Master Sergeant Patricia Hendricks, her former team leader, now wearing colonel's insignia and serving as director of one of the 3 new training facilities that had been established using Amanda's methods. The citation continued, detailing achievements that Amanda had spent 20 years trying to forget. Her maintenance protocols resulted in a 97% mission success rate for special operations vehicles under combat conditions. Her diagnostic innovation saved an estimated 400 American lives and prevented countless mission failures. But the most meaningful moment came when the Chief of Staff departed from the official script. Perhaps most importantly, Master Sergeant Brooks demonstrated that true service doesn't end with discharge. Her civilian work has revolutionized military technical training, creating a new generation of mechanics who combine military precision with innovative thinking. After the ceremony, Amanda found herself surrounded by well-wishers and reporters. But her attention was drawn to a small group standing quietly near the back of the reception area. 3 women in military uniforms, young enough to be her daughters, waited patiently for the crowd to thin. Dr. Brooks, the senior of the 3, a staff sergeant wearing Air Force maintenance insignia, stepped forward nervously. "I'm Sarah Martinez. I graduated from your program 6 months ago." Amanda recognized the name immediately. Martinez had been one of the most promising students in the Advanced Electronics course, demonstrating the kind of intuitive understanding of complex systems that couldn't be taught, only nurtured. "Staff Sergeant Martinez, how are you applying what you learned?" "I'm deployed in Afghanistan right now, supporting special operations missions," Martinez replied, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Last month, our unit's primary communications vehicle suffered a catastrophic failure during a time-sensitive operation. Using the diagnostic principles you taught me, I was able to identify and repair the problem in under 2 hours." "What was the failure?" "Electromagnetic interference was causing intermittent signal degradation that conventional diagnostics couldn't isolate. I remembered your lesson about listening to equipment and trusting intuition over procedures. The interference pattern sounded wrong, too regular to be environmental. I found a loose connection in the shielding that was creating a resonance frequency." Amanda smiled, recognizing the application of principles she'd learned through 20 years of practical experience. "And the mission?" "Successful extraction of a high-value intelligence asset. Mission commander said my repair work directly contributed to saving American lives." The other two women stepped forward, Lieutenant Jennifer Chun from the Navy and Corporal Lisa Townsend from the Army. Both were graduates of expanded training programs that had been established at military bases across the country. "Dr. Brooks," Lieutenant Chun said, "I wanted you to know that your program changed more than how I approach mechanical problems. It changed how I think about leadership and decision-making under pressure." "How so?" "You taught us that expertise means being willing to challenge assumptions, even when those assumptions come from authority figures. That lesson applies to more than just vehicle maintenance." Corporal Thompson nodded agreement. "In my unit, they call graduates of your program Brooks Mechanics. It's become a mark of distinction, mechanics who can think as well as repair." Amanda felt tears threatening as she contemplated the implications of their words. Her training program wasn't just creating better mechanics. It was developing military leaders who understood the value of critical thinking and innovative problem-solving. Commander Tyler Reed approached with two other Navy SEALs, both wearing the kind of specialized insignia that indicated classified operations experience. "Amanda," Tyler said, using her first name despite the formal setting, "I wanted you to meet Lieutenant Commander Sarah Davis and Master Chief John Rodriguez. Yes, the same Rodriguez who was one of your first students." Rodriguez stepped forward with a grin that transformed his serious features. "Dr. Brooks, I've been promoted twice since completing your program. Turns out that teaching mechanics to think like engineers makes them valuable for more than just vehicle maintenance." "What kind of additional duties?" "Mission planning and equipment selection," Lieutenant Commander Davis explained. "Special operations teams need technical advisors who understand both the capabilities and limitations of our equipment. Your graduates excel at that kind of analysis." Tyler nodded. "Rodriguez's insights have influenced equipment procurement decisions worth hundreds of millions of dollars. His field experience, combined with the analytical skills your program developed, makes him invaluable for evaluating new technology." As the reception continued, Amanda found herself in conversation after conversation with people whose lives had been touched by her work. Students who'd gone on to distinguished careers, officers who'd relied on equipment maintained by her graduates, family members of soldiers whose lives had been saved by proper vehicle maintenance in combat zones. Castellano appeared at her elbow, looking slightly overwhelmed by the Pentagon's formal atmosphere, but beaming with pride. "Amanda, I've got some news from home. The town council voted to rename Main Street in your honor. They're calling it Master Sergeant Brooks Boulevard." "Lou, that's unnecessary." "Maybe, but it's happening anyway. You've put Millbrook on the map in ways we never imagined. 300 new jobs, millions in federal investment, and a reputation as the place where military innovation happens. Not bad for a woman who just wanted to fix cars quietly." As the evening wound down, Amanda stepped outside onto the Pentagon ceremonial steps, looking out over the Virginia landscape that seemed both foreign and familiar. 21 years ago, she'd left military service carrying guilt that had poisoned 2 decades of her life. Tonight, she was returning to civilian life carrying recognition that validated everything she'd sacrificed and achieved. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Nina Santos. "Watching this ceremony online. Millbrook is throwing a welcome home party next weekend. The whole town wants to celebrate our hero." Amanda smiled, tucking the phone away as she contemplated the strange journey that had brought her full circle. The scared, guilt-ridden mechanic who'd sought anonymity in a small Montana town had become a nationally recognized expert whose innovations were changing military culture. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation was internal. She'd learned that service wasn't about perfection, it was about dedication, resilience, and the courage to keep improving despite setbacks. Her 20-year exile hadn't been wasted time. It had been preparation for a kind of service she never could have imagined. Tomorrow she would return to Millbrook and the training center that had become her life's work. There would be new students to teach, new innovations to develop, and new opportunities to prove that America's greatest strength lay not in its technology, but in its people's willingness to serve something larger than themselves. The wrench that had fallen in Castellano's garage 18 months ago had set in motion a series of events that transformed not just Amanda's life, but the lives of hundreds of military personnel who would serve their country with greater skill and confidence, because of what they'd learned from a woman who'd finally learned to forgive herself. Some stories end with vindication. Others end with recognition. Amanda's story ended with something more valuable than either: the knowledge that redemption comes not from erasing the past, but from using it to build a better future for others. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.